Hi there, and thank you for tuning in, and welcome to my garden. I got a question from Jose, and he says that he wants to know how to do long exposure, that is 10 seconds or so, on a Nikon D750 that I have right here. And this video is for you, Jose, and hopefully others will also get something out of watching this video. There are three things you need to control when we're talking long exposure, or any exposure for that matter. It's ISO, it's aperture, and it's shutter speed. The shutter speed is sort of given because you have to set that to, say, 10 seconds or maybe even more. So you can't really play with that parameter in order to get a correct exposure. So the other two parameters is the aperture and then the ISO. And we start with the ISO because let's get that out of the way. So here in your Nikon D750, to take ISO out of the equation, you have to set it so that auto ISO is switched off. And maybe also if you have lots of light, which is the case today because it's a sunny day, you want to take your ISO sensitivity to 100, or maybe even some of the low values. It has 3 values where you can take up to a stop of light out. So I set mine to LO1, and that means I think that it takes as much light out as it can via ISO. But very important is that you don't have auto ISO set on, because that will just be a parameter that interferes with what we are trying to do here. So you set the settings by turning the front and the rear command dial while you hold the button pushed. Then you can change the values here like this. That's easy. The third thing you need to control, that's the aperture. And the aperture, you would typically, because you have plenty of light when you're shooting 10 seconds, actually you have way too much of it, especially on a sunny day like this. What you want to do is you want to close it down, typically. But be aware that if you close it down, all your lens can take, say f22 or something like that, the light travels through a very, very small hole, and that can give diffraction, meaning that your images looks a little bit soft. So avoid the extremes, subject of course to what your lens can provide, but don't go to the extremes. That would be my advice in order simply to avoid diffraction. But otherwise, typically you want to close it down. Of course, also if you want to have an image where the depth of field isn't so deep, but you want to have it more shallow, then you also need to stay at an aperture that is not fully closed down, obviously. So when I typically shoot in manual mode here on my D750. So I push the button here on top of the camera and turn it to manual, and now I can control everything. We have just set ISO. We've just set ISO to be manual, right, to 100 or even lower, and therefore that is out of the equation. So the only thing to control now is the aperture and the shutter speed. And the shutter speed you control by turning the rear command dial, and the aperture on the front command dial. If you're subject to your lens, if you have an older lens, you may need to turn it on the lens itself, but otherwise that is the way to do it. Front command dial, aperture, rear command dial, shutter speed. And you of course want to set your shutter speed to a long exposure, so you can give it a try and set it to 10 seconds if that is to your wish, maybe even more. And you can see that it counts seconds. It gives you a little a double mark in the display when you are into the seconds. If otherwise it's a fraction of a second typically. So if you keep turning, you will see that it gives you these little quotation marks, and that's actually counting seconds. The final thing you need, because you have so much light, that is an ND filter. And an ND filter is basically just a pair of sunglasses that you put in front of your lens. And what that does is, it's just like a pair of sunglasses. It reduces the amount of light that comes in. And you need that, especially when you're shooting in ambient light where you can't control the amount of light that's available. You need an ND filter. And if you ask me, I would say the stronger the better, because you can always make the exposure longer if your ND filter is too strong. It's difficult to go the other way, to block out light if your filter is too weak. So buy one that is as strong as you can get them. That would be my advice. I have one here that is a variable ND filter. And that means I can, by turning the ring, I can control how strong it is. And the advantage of that is that when I have to focus, the problem is that when you have an ND filter that's very strong, you can't see anything in the viewfinder. It's just, you just see a black wall. So if you can turn it here to a less strong position, then you can actually see in the viewfinder focus, manual focus that is. Then you're ready, then you can turn it to full strength if that's to your liking, and then you can take your shot without refocusing. And I would say, if you don't have a variable ND filter, you may find that you need to actually take the filter off, focus, mount the filter, and then shoot. So that's a bit of a cumbersome process, but it works. I've done that before I bought this filter, so no problems with that. When it comes to correct exposure, I'm super lazy, I must admit. I often do trial and error, meaning that I simply shoot and then I look at the histogram and see if it's lefty, then it's underexposed, and if it's the other way around, then it's overexposed, and then I adjust the settings according to that. You can see here it's a little bit, it touches the right hand side, so it's a little bit overexposed. So what I could do was I could close down the aperture just a little bit more. I'm shooting here at f11. If I go to f13 and then try again, then you can see if that gets a little bit better. You can also use the meter in the camera, but in my experience the metering is off when you have an ND filter mounted. So that's of course subject to your liking if you want to use that as a guide, but in my experience trial and error works. And you can see here it still is a little bit to the bright side, so if I let it just reduce the seconds down to 15 perhaps, and then increase the strength of the ND filter just a little bit, and then give it a shot more. It takes 15 seconds for it to process this. You will also notice that because the exposure is so long, it may also take some time for the camera to process the image afterwards. So if you have preview switched on, it may take a little while before the image is shown. And here you can see this looks, if you ask me, this looks okay. The heavy part is in the middle, and yeah, it's not that bad. It's not a fantastic image. The point was to illustrate how it's done, not to produce a fantastic image. But yeah, this is actually all there is to it. So set your ISO to manual, set your ISO to base ISO or even lower on the D750. Shoot at an aperture that of course is as you see fit, but typically in order to give you long exposures, you may find you need to close it down subject to your ND filter. And then of course your ND filter should be, in my experience, as strong as possible, because you can always let in more light by increasing the shutter speed, the shutter time, but it's difficult to block out the light. Yeah. So that's it from me. Hope this was useful. If you have some questions or maybe even some fantastic image shots with long exposure, let me know in the comments below. If you have a link to Instagram or wherever you publish your pictures, it would be good to see some examples of long exposures. As always, happy shoot. Take care. Bye bye.